with Prince Harry, and he's become one of your beloved. You've threatened to take him from my home and take him with you when you go back to the UK.
It wasn't a threat.
It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. We have been working on his passport, so we'll see. But I thought you had a really interesting training session this morning. Just kind of as not a joke, but you just said, "Hey, wouldn't it be fun if we could clip his nails?"
Yeah.
And I didn't know where you were going to start with it, but all of a sudden you started to get things together, and I just backed up and put it on camera. So I thought maybe we would talk about it today, because as we talked about it, a lot of the things that you were doing are things that, and nobody be shocked, but
OMG, Theresa, you just shocked me.
we should also look when we're training humans, right? So we're looking at body language, we're looking where the learner is engaged, and how far to go and how far to not go, right? Where do we stop, and what are the clues that we have as teachers that say we should push our learners, we should be more gentle with our learners, and everything that comes in between. So if you want to tell us a little bit about what your plans were.
So I didn't really have a set plan when I started. My plan was to see what I had to work with in terms of behavior. So if I had Harry on the table, I'd be at a surface where I could see his feet easily. So that was part of my plan. Have a comfy surface where he wouldn't slip, so the mat on the table. And then after that, I just wanted to see what would he give me. And I decided I wanted the behavior of foot coming up on my hand, and just so I can manipulate it, he's comfortable with foot coming on my hand, me touching it, moving it around before I start doing any kind of clipping.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you take that back anymore, we need to see, is he comfortable just shifting his weight for that long, right?
Yeah, exactly.
With Penny, my dog you've been working with, we were doing some of those things, and all of a sudden we found weaknesses that turned out to be an injury that was on its way.
Exactly.
So not just part of the trick, but is the animal ready for this? And it's the same thing with humans. Sometimes we'll ask humans to do things that we think they should be able to do, but they're taller, or they're shorter, or they're bigger or smaller, or have a long old broken ankle that they don't even remember, and we're like, why aren't they doing it the way I told them? So that's interesting. Okay.
And it's like you can't try harder because that's not going to help. And so almost when you're doing this gives you a great platform for observations, like you say, the small details of, do we have the muscular development of the system, the like muscular strength to be able to do some of the things we're asking the learner to do. And it may just seem like the cat's sitting, but when you sit and you lift a paw up, it shifts your body in a completely different direction. So if you're not used to being able to maintain balance in that situation, then the nail clips are never going to work. Right. So I really like that, looking at the small detail. Yeah,
and catastrophic things can happen to kill your relationship if you try to push it, because that's what you want. And, well, or not even that, but you didn't see it. Right. Had you been able to see it, you would have stopped. But you just didn't know.
And that's the benefit of watching things back like this, like we're doing, and having an independent eye, someone who's different to the person that's doing the training, and seeing what they see, or hearing what they see, because I may see something different, I may not see certain things that you see. So actually sitting here and watching this together is really beneficial, because we'll get to see new things for each other.
Perfect.
So let's see what we have. So there, his foot has touched my hand, and so I'm paying, and I want to reinforce as much as possible within that position. So that
now we took his hand off.
Yep. So then I'm going to arrange the environment to promote foot on hand behavior, and I'm doing that by holding the food in a certain position, the stick with the food, and as his foot comes forward or touches my hand, I'm paying.
So I don't think we have the volume on this. Were you clicking, or are you saying good, or both? Maybe?
I was saying both. But sometimes I was just feeding. So if the behavior was just, I was just feeding the whole time. Sometimes if I saw the moment the foot came up and hit my hand, I clicked with my mouth, like, or say good and give the treat. So if his head turns away, I'm just waiting. When he re-engages and looks towards me, I ask to see if he will engage for the next response.
So how heavy was his weight on your hand right there? Was it just touching, or do you remember?
I think there was a mixture. So I had a few that were just touching, and I had a few which the foot went on fully. And also there was a change, so that once he actually started eating, the foot touched, he started eating, the foot, the foot actually pressed more. So I started reinforcing the moment the food appeared, was as his foot was coming up, or as it started to touch my hand, like there, it's just leaning on my hand, but by the time he is fully eating, his foot was pressing in. And so if the act of eating, or if the act of having food in front of you is reinforcing, then what I'm banking on is I'm putting in all this reinforcement history for these behaviors. And so when we do a session tomorrow, or even within this session, what I want to see is I want to start seeing that foot touching hand more.
Let me stop the video there, because there's some cool things in the video I want to see, but I want to go back to that. So you're saying even if it's not the behavior that you would ultimately like, which is the paw on there, lots of weight, you are still reinforcing that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's chafing or approximations towards what we want.
Exactly.
Those kind of words.
Yeah.
But we were talking about earlier that even if you weren't getting any of the behaviors that you're ultimately on your training plan, that you being with him in a specific spot and working together and creating this, what do you want to call this
relationship, engagement.
Yeah. So sometimes I've seen you reinforce just being there with you.
Yeah. And the animal can't read my mind. I can't read the animal's mind, but there's benefits to that, because in a training session, if I can get out of my head in terms of, okay, I have a plan, but the journey is really important, and my priorities in any teaching situation, whether it's a human learner or non-human learner, is I ask the questions in my head, which is, will the learner want to come back the next time? So if there's an opportunity again to do something, a training session, a learning session, whatever you want to call it, a game, will they say, oh yes, I want to come and play that game? If I get that, for me that's success.
And that means that your session before had been reinforcing by the very nature of the word, because they want to come back and do that again.
Exactly.
Right? Is that correct?
Yeah. Okay. And that gives me the opportunity to work towards an outcome, or a more outcome-focused goal, as in nail clip. Whereas in the session, if I don't get my nail clip, or things start going differently to what I planned, if I still make it worthwhile for the learner to be there, and I still reinforce behaviors of being in that situation, they come back the next time, I have another opportunity to reshape or try another training plan. But if I don't meet that goal of the learner wanting to be there, I don't have the next opportunity.
You have zero.
Exactly.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So here again, you're just trying to create a weight shift so he can lift his paw?
Exactly. Okay. And sometimes his paw lifts, but it lifts towards the food as opposed to my hand. Because this was at the beginning of a training session, or this was a new behavior I'm working on, I started today, I reinforced any of that paw movement, whether that paw came onto my hand or whether it lifted up, because ultimately part of the behavior I want is paw lift and paw moving to my hand. So I'm going to reinforce all of those topographies, because I want those topographies to be there. And
I see here now he's shifting between left and right, so that was okay with you as well.
Exactly, because I want to be able to clip both all 4 nails eventually, but the front 2 nails, so I'm going to go with both. And you see, as I initially feed, as his paw starts to touch my hand, it relaxes into my hand.
Yeah.
If I can get, and then by that time that food finishes, if I can get the food up again before his paw comes off, I've got more opportunities to reinforce. Because I hadn't broken the food down in the tin, I had to try and break it with my hand. While I was doing that, his paw was coming off again. So at one point you'll see in the video, I actually just stop for a second and break the food up. So then it allows me to get the next reinforcer there quicker, so I'm able to keep his foot on my hand and build duration. Because there I'm reinforcing foot coming off, foot coming on, foot coming off, foot coming on, and I may want that because I want the practice of foot coming on, but also I want duration. So if I want duration, then I want to be able to get my reinforcer there without causing his foot to come off.
So I love this little loose paw he's got. Is he just not thinking about it, or is he kind of testing the situation, or does it not really matter?
So I don't think it matters. It could be any of the above, and sometimes I really don't know, because I don't know what he's thinking about, but I don't know if he's testing something. But the likelihood is an animal is going to test if something's safe. If they haven't got a reinforcement history, if I sit on this branch or I move my foot here, will I fall off? And so potentially they're going to do things to keep them safe first and foremost. So if I can set the situation up so there's safety there in the first place, I'm going to get behavior a lot faster. Also, I know that if the behavior is happening, the more I can reinforce that behavior, the stronger it's going to get. And so as long as the feeding is functioning as a reinforcer, something that makes behavior stronger, then what's happening is I'm making that behavior stronger.
Got it. It doesn't really matter why it got there.
Exactly.
Yeah. As long as it's not dangerous or painful or something.
And also what I'm watching for is in between exactly, so meow, exactly, meow. Any in between the sessions, if is there long pauses, so after he finishes eating, does he wait ages before he actually tries the next rep? If that was happening, I would change what I'm doing to that's telling me he's starting to disengage, or potentially there's a lot of time happening where there's no benefit because he's just sitting there and he's getting paid for sitting without the behavior I want in the session. As much as I possibly can have is foot on hand, or foot moving towards hand, some approximation. So in the whole session, if I start seeing latency, or I start seeing long periods of time in between asking for something and him doing something, then I'm going to change what I do. Okay, so that's that session.
Yeah,
and
that's great.
Yeah.
So what would you do now? And I think this actually was the end of the session, or pretty close to it.
I think there was like a minute left after on another clip, but it was pretty much towards the end of the session.
So in your head on this session with this cat at this location, when you think about doing it tomorrow, what do you kind of have noodling around in your head?
So
knowing that it might not work that way.
Yeah. So honestly, my process is, what am I I just want to see what was the result of yesterday's session, because you can't really define a reinforcer without seeing what happens in the future.
Say that again.
See, a reinforcer is defined by its effect on behavior, like future behavior. Yeah. And so if I can't see into the future, how can I tell what I'm doing right now is reinforcing? Now you can do that per rep, so based on from one rep to the next, did I see some change in behavior? Now in this whole session, did I see his foot touch hand more? In the moment, without objectively analysing it, I thought I did. I was seeing more foot on hand. I can come back now and watch the video and say, okay, how many seconds of foot on hand did I get from the start to the end? Did I get more? And so that told me, yep, in that session, what I was doing was functioning as reinforcers. Feeding was reinforcing, or presenting food was reinforcing. Tomorrow, I'm going to start in a similar way. I'm going to hold out my hand, hold out the food. What I'm looking for is, do I get quicker foot on hand? Does the foot stay there longer? Is the foot there with more pressure? If I see no change, that tells me potentially what I did yesterday wasn't very effective.
Except for the actual behavior to behavior.
Exactly.
Not about this whole session and working with you and
yes.
And okay.
So this session was successful for me because I've got an animal who I think will come back the next time I say you want to play. They're going to be there wanting to play. And if I can't really ask the animal, but I can ask them in that way by asking them to do another session. But if I could say to the animal, how was this for you? Even if they didn't know what they're getting paid for, they weren't consciously aware of it. They were like, this was great, I was just getting paid.
Yeah.
That's the kind of attitude I want from a learner, is going, because you don't always have to be consciously aware that you're doing something for to know that you're learning it. For example, sometimes you do certain habits and someone goes, how do you do that? You go, oh, I actually don't have a clue.
I don't even know.
And so by nature, we're designed to our behavior as a result of the consequences, so we get our behavior shaped all the time without us knowing what we're doing. And sometimes, and knowing is maybe what we define as, can you verbalize it, or can you do this? And that's a different skill. And so if we want to teach that, we teach it at a separate moment or separate time.
So go back, because that was really important. Doing it, performing it, and knowing what you did, and being able to replicate it. Being able to replicate it under stimulus control or from a cue. These are all separate levels of skills.
Separate pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, because in human behavior, we often do this. We go in as teachers, and we deliver information, and we leave. But we don't. They stayed in the class for whatever was reinforcing, because they were told, because they were getting paid, because they were interested, because they loved the teacher. But whether they could take that information with them and do it the next day is a different skill.
And exactly, and also, as a teacher, if I define, I want my student to learn and I want them to know something. If knowing is measured by, they can verbalize it, or they just showed me. And that was my limit. So I went to a classroom, I taught something, and I said to someone, so tell me, and they said something. I was like, they know it. They come back the next week and they haven't done it again, or it's not working. I go, but they know it. They're just doing it. They're being difficult. But what I measured...
They told me it once.
Exactly.
You should be able to repeat it again.
Exactly. What I observed was they were able to say these words. I didn't observe anything else. So if knowing is that limited, it's not going to be a useful construct. Whereas if knowing is, I want them to be able to engage in these physical actions with short latency or long duration. I want them to be able to say these words. I want them to be able to see something and identify and label it. If I identify what knowing is, and then I start to teach each of those nuggets like we just talked about, I can say, okay, my student is on a journey to knowing, but I haven't met all these criteria yet to go, they have full knowing, if that makes sense.
Well, and you can always break that down, right? Some people say that's soft skill, but
Yes.
it's really not. You can break it down to, can they repeat it?
Yep.
Can they teach it to somebody else? And if those things are now a skill, can they do the skill?
Yes.
Can they do the skill later? Can they do the skill generalized in a different area? So there's all these different levels, and I think what's important about that is, as teachers, we're talking about how do we reinforce teachers for taking it slow or taking it at the student's pace. And so if we break it down for ourselves, yes, they could repeat it. Yes, they could teach somebody else. Yes, they could do it again in a week. Yes, they could perform it. Yes, they could perform it under duress or generalized in a different area. Then we can say, I did it. I taught them. I taught them. I taught them. I taught it in 10 different places. So now I'm reinforced 10 times instead of saying, here's the information. You got it, right? And then if you don't do it, then I'm not reinforced with you, and I say you're a bad learner, I don't want to work with you anymore. So I think we need to help teachers find more reinforcement for working with the learner at their own speed. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense, because if you can break it down, you can actually, it's like almost like a tick list or a to-do list. Like if you tick something off, you go, I've done my to-do list today, I've managed to put a tick next to it. It's almost, if we can identify what those little nuggets are, and I call them puzzle pieces, because essentially, say at the end is your puzzle picture, what you want. What I'm working on initially is, can I collect all the pieces? And then can I put the pieces together? And again, that's two separate things for me. And so can I design these pieces? I need all of these different pieces. Now I'm going to start putting them together. And if a teacher can identify what those pieces are, how to put them together, and then we tick as we do each one, you can measurably see a difference, because you see a difference in the learner's behavior, and you can also see where you've started from and where you've come to. There were no pieces on the table. There was only 2 pieces on the table when you started. Student and teacher. Exactly. But now you've got 500 pieces which can fit in so many different ways, and we label those different ways as, I've got a student who's so creative, they're so imaginative, but that came from creating these little pieces and being able to fit them in different ways, and creating different pictures with, essentially, you've got 500 puzzle pieces. If you put them one way, you create one picture. You go, oh, if I turn them this way, or I shift the pieces around this way and they also fit this way, I create another picture. So if we can teach all of those to be able to do that, I think we have all this, like the learners that we want. And then if we get super creative, we get learners who can cut off all the edges and make a completely different puzzle with those puzzle pieces. Exactly. Don't cut it. Yeah, it'll work. Don't worry. I'll just cut this one too. And because if I've got this image in my head, like these puzzle pieces analogy that we're using now, and I'm thinking, oh, we'll put pieces like this together. I've never thought about cutting them, but suddenly a student comes and they've got a learning reinforcement history now that gets them to go, oh, I can cut this. Now, if we don't limit the student, they go, no, that's wrong. And we actually stop and go, oh, let's see what I can learn here as well as a teacher. Suddenly go, that's genius. I would never have thought about that, because you have a different learning history to me. And I have a different learning history to you. So it's not that what you're saying is going to be wrong. It's actually, I need to actually listen, because I haven't got access to the learning that you have, and you haven't got access to the learning I have.
Got different pieces.
Exactly. And so that's why I think the teacher is a learner, the learner is a teacher.
And that's a big deal right now, is teaching creativity, right? How do you teach creativity? Well, if you give them the puzzle pieces, teach them how they all work, and then show that different puzzle pieces can come in. And, oh, by the way, you can change the puzzle pieces to make them fit in different ways. So again, what I'm trying to say is that we can teach things that have been thought of as soft skills, right? If you just break them down. And because I've come from the teaching coaching background, all my love is for the teachers, coaches. So I'm like, how do we reinforce ourselves for the things that make it easier for our students, but typically have been thought of as more painful for us? Breaking it down, taking it longer, doing it their way. We just want to say, here's the information, your responsibility. So if we can make it more reinforcing for ourselves, to find those, not only the check boxes for the student, but the check boxes for the teacher, I think it will be more reinforcing for us to do that.
Definitely. So, and when we're doing this, we have to remember, set ourselves up for success. Like you say, how do we arrange the environment to make it reinforcing for us to do certain things or to teach in certain ways? Is don't aim for perfection, because you could say, I need to break this into 50 small pieces. and then you sit there and you go, oh, I've done written out 2, but I don't know what the third, it's just too hard. Whereas I go, actually, let me just pick 1 today, or let me pick 1 this week, and if I'll see how this one works. And then if you can meet that and you're able to take it off, you want to do the next one, or you want to do 2 or 3 more. Whereas if we try and do 50 little nugget pieces that we're not used to doing, we try to do behaviors that we haven't practiced or been reinforced previously, almost you're never going to start, because you're setting yourself up to fail.
And I think that's what I liked about, if you know anything about TAGteach, and we talk about tag points, is because when I was a gymnastic coach, all we did was say nothing is ever perfect, right? So there was never perfection, except we're getting paid to create perfection.
Yeah.
So I said, oh, we can have perfection. So if you're one of those persons who needs to be perfect and needs to be complete, we can make it. But you just have to put the definition around it. Give it a beginning and a middle and an end, or a beginning and end that says, yes, that's perfect. It's just, when you make perfection all of these pieces, that's when we get frustrated. So if you are a very competitive type, if you are a coach who gets paid for success, we can create perfection.
Yeah.
It just needs to be defined and not as some goal that eventually needs to be perfect.
I think that's an excellent point, because, like I said, don't aim for perfection. Actually, aim for perfection.
Absolutely.
But just redefine what perfection is and make it achievable. I love that.
Yes. And whether the student helps you define that perfection for you, like I'll often say to you, can I just do this? And you're like, yes. I'm like, good. So I can define it. You can define it. And I think we're going to talk about this later in a separate section, but how do we help the learner say, I'm going to help you know what I need as perfection? You know, can I start to make the beginnings and ends? You can guide me, but I'm going to ask and make them confident enough to make those decisions and that creativity.
Exactly.
So we'll talk about that another time.
Oh, another one coming soon.
Yeah.
Super. We'll see you guys later.